Hey, this is Gabrielle, and I want to tell you why polyvagal theory is relevant to your situation if you're dealing with any kind of significant loss or trauma. I'm trying to make this as simple as I can because it is a little bit complicated, but it's relevant to learning what you can do if you understand how this works. It's really clear that there's a pattern interrupt that has to happen. So let me share my screen. Here we go. Okay, so depending on the experiences you've had, the reason this is important is because it may be hard to distinguish between threat and non-threat. You may actually be responding to life as if everything is threatening, especially if you've been grieving for years. So we'll come back to that later, but I want to first clarify the pathways. So what we're talking about is an old model of the autonomic of the nervous system and a new model. So in the old model, the autonomic nervous system is the part of the brain and the nervous system that governs automatic functions. So you have two. It was thought that you have two branches. The motor nerve part controls conscious awareness of movement and feeling things and temperature. The autonomic nervous system, autonomic meaning it's the control center for the automatic functions of the body. The heart beats on its own without needing your instruction. You breathe while you're sleeping. Your nervous system regulates immunity and other things that happen without conscious thought. So then comes in Stephen Porges, who is a doctor who coined the term neurosection to describe when our nervous system detects and responds to cues before we even have thought about anything. I mean, faster than thought. So to understand neuroception, imagine being startled. Your body responds physically before you have time for your thoughts to even catch up. You find yourself suddenly tense. There's a change in your breathing. Your body responds faster than thought in an emergency automatically because of the things that we're talking about here. So you've probably heard that the fight or flight response is the sympathetic branch of the nervous system, and it's a dominant response. It energizes you to take action in times of need. It increases your blood pressure and your heart rate. It shunts all the blood towards the muscles so that you're in readiness for fight or flight. So the new findings indicate a three-part hierarchical system. The vagus nerve is part of the parasympathetic fight or flight response. We're just going to concern ourselves with this for a moment. So it governs response in emergencies in ways that it's helpful to understand if you want to be able to reverse the process. So the new findings indicate that the parasympathetic branch includes a dorsal vagus nerve and a ventral vagus nerve. Dorsal just means back, ventral means towards the front or the stomach. The dorsal vagus nerve arises from the dorsal structures. It originates in the brainstem, travels the roots below the diaphragm, and it affects organs below the diaphragm, especially digestion, and it takes us out of any relationship with the environment into that frozen state, which is literally a deer in the headlights is the beginnings of that. At its most extreme, it makes animals freeze because the impulse is to play dead in the hopes that the prey will then move on and just think they're dead. But it's not a thought process, it's an electrochemical process. So then going on to the ventral vagus branch, it originates in the same place, but it travels down the front through the diaphragm. It travels upwards and connects with the nerves of the neck, the throat, and the eyes. Again, these are all places that need to be hyper alert in an emergency. The teleceptors help us discern what's going on around us. So it's a heightened state of awareness. It's related to the hypervigilance response that veterans experience. If you're somebody who goes into a restaurant and you need to have your back against the wall so you can see what's going on, it's possible that that is sort of latently always in play with you. It influences heart rate, breathing rates. It does move us more into social engagement. But if you think about it, when you go to a party or something, you're in a sort of heightened, more of an extrovert part of yourself, right? And that's related to how this works. One of the reasons Dr. Porges' view of the autonomic nervous system is so groundbreaking is that he makes it clear that our environment doesn't just include the outside. It doesn't just include even the room that we live in. It includes our internal environment. In fact, Feldenkrais has been saying this for years. Feldenkrais practitioners have been saying this for years. He's been saying it through them because he's also moved on to the next plane. But he's been saying for years, since the 40s, I think, that our primary environment is our internal environment. And so the nervous system governs that environment. It governs the electrical impulses. It governs what turns on the hormonal responses. And so if this is another way to look at it, right? So when you're in a state of safety on the left here, this green zone, you're in the ventral vagal pathway, and you're in a social state, you're relaxed, your peripheral vision is clear, it's easy to connect and engage, it's easy to see options, you are able to think of things you wouldn't otherwise think of. For example, there is a story about a truck that got stuck under a bridge, and all these people, the fire people, everybody was coming around, the police were there, they were trying to figure out how to get this truck unstuck from the bridge. And this guy walks by with a 5-year-old kid, and they're watching, people watch, and so they're trying to figure out what to do, and the 5-year-old says, hey, why don't they just take the air out of the tires? So they take the air out of the tires, boom, the truck is unstuck and it gets out from underneath the bridge easily. But he had no stake in it. This child was in that state that people are in before we, as we get older out of childhood, number one, we're trained out of seeing possibilities in terms, we're told not to imagine things, we're told to don't touch this, don't do that, so we kind of are shut down from that point of view. But we're also operating in a more theta brainwave pattern, which means that we're completely in a state of innocence and openness to the environment, to experience. We have no preconditioned ideas. We have no memories that we're like, it's not that we don't have any memories, but the store of traumatic memories that compiles over time, let's say from the age of 20 to 40, it has a very different effect on how we think. So children don't have that baggage. So again, back to this left-hand column, the breathing is calm, the heart rate is normal, we're clear, we're focused, we're able to interpret our environment and our internal signals as well, and we communicate well. By contrast, the middle zone, the yellow zone, there's a perceived danger. Now, it may be real or it may not be real. That's the other reason this is such groundbreaking work, because it revealed that we respond automatically in advance based on previous traumatic experiences. So if we've not had any traumatic experiences, this doesn't count. But what happens is we get shunted into fight or flight. There's hyperarousal, we're readiness to move away. What we perceive is dangerous, whether it is or not. So we respond to what we perceive, not to what's actually happening. And we respond many times to the present as if it were something that happened in the past, because the nerve endings that relate to movement and memory are adjacent to each other in the brain, and every now and then something happens that just reminds us of something that put us into this state of arousal, and boom, we're triggered. And that means basically that this part of the nervous system has been activated, and it can manifest as rage, panic, Blame, attacks, judgment, that's actually kind of a scale that goes from the worst to least problematic, but that's another topic. And then on the right, we've got life threat. So actual serious life threat, as in really being physically attacked might be an example. That puts us right into the dorsal vagal pathway, or at re-experiencing a moment where we felt as if we were under threat in terms of our life or our survival. And so that activates this extreme state of immobilization, which equates to the deer in the headlights. It's also accompanied by experiences of shame and hopelessness and overwhelm. So paralysis is a feeling of having no choices. And it's a disassociated state, meaning that we go out of our bodies and we're no longer really connected. So everything's shut down, all the housekeeping functions of digestion and immunity and just well-being is shut down. It's frozen. And even the fight or flight mode is frozen in this situation. So there are three important things to understand about polyvagal theory. The autonomic ladder is an understanding of the nervous system that helps reverse the process. So the pathways are rooted in our evolution. Cold-blooded animals, like reptiles, they live in this lowest dorsal vagal response because it's the oldest, most primitive part of the chain. But they don't really have, the evolved frontal lobes that human beings have. And it's been shown through various studies that the prefrontal cortex is where we make decisions which relate to morality. For example, there was a study done with people who were on death row, and they asked them questions that related to moral decisions, and there was no activity really registering in their brain. Or, they were like hardened criminals who'd committed murders and had no remorse. And that part of their brain just was not activated when they were asked questions that was trying to, make them make decisions about that. So they're probably living in a fight or flight response or a shutdown response anyway. I think most of them actually spend a lot of time in solitary confinement, especially if they're violent. So, it just kind of confirms this hypothesis or this theoretical framework that is giving us a new understanding into how we can release trauma. So human cognition has a unique capacity for moral decision making that resides in the higher brainstem, and it's a part of the ventral vagal response. If we're not in that brainwave state, then we can't access it because we're on autopilot. We're just like functioning in response to life instead of deciding or responding to life. So all three systems developed from the bottom up over the course of the evolutionary timeline. In a parallel manner, these parts of our brain also respond to the environment sequentially from the bottom up if we subject ourselves to the right environment. And again, this is a Feldenkrais idea. Awareness through movement classes are described as set up with an intention to create a safe space for exploration so that we can learn by trial and error, doing new experimental movements that allow us to find a more functional way to move through life. And just to give you an example of an environment that's conducive to a sense of safety, a felt sense of safety by the nervous system, almost all, not all, but most awareness through movement lessons in the Feldenkrais method are taught with lying down, because when you're lying down, number one, you can't fall if you're already lying on the floor, and number two, your postural muscles are not engaged, so there's even less need to have any sense of a lack of safety. And the primary function of the nervous system is to protect and house the brain. So to keep the brain from hitting the ground, to keep the brain from falling over. So if you're standing up, there's always some part of your nervous system that's engaged in this process of making sure that the operating system is safe. Whereas if you're lying on the ground, that part of your nervous system can be is sort of in a state of observation that, okay, we're good, we don't need to like activate the postural muscles. So it's a safe environment. And then that is an example of, an optimal learning state. So we slide between these states in which in the same specified order. In other words, the state of arousal, ironically, goes from the prefrontal cortex, which is the newer part of the brain and the top of the nervous system, or the top of the brain stem, down towards the back of the brain, towards where the sympathetic nervous response happens. And then the dorsal vagal response is the lowest, most primitive part in the lower brain stem. And our life experiences shape the way that we move between these three distinct systems. So adverse experiences, like trauma, can result in our brain defaulting to an overactivation in the mid to bottom section of the ladder. And experiences like trauma mean that we have a hard time navigating through these various states in a healthy way. So it compromises our ability to recover when we do move between these different states, unless we do some work in which helps us learn how to fix that. So it's not that you're broken, but things like awareness training, mindfulness training, different processes that help you shift your state, your psychological state from a sense of, feeling like you're trapped to feeling safe. There are things that you can learn how to do, and there are processes that can help you get there. So when you know how to do that, it helps you reverse the process and go up the ladder. And keep in mind that the system activates within a range. So it's not like we stay at one place. There's a range of what's normal for us, and we live within that range. But I would say that a good definition of resilience, in addition to the ability to adapt, is the ability to change your range from one of sort of anxious, fearful, depressive, not so happy, to one of satisfied, content, appreciative, aware, mindful, present. Just that would be a range that it'd be a whole lot more fun to live in. Somebody who might have been abused as a child would likely spend a good amount of time in the sympathetic and dorsal vagal pathways towards the bottom of the ladder. And when someone responds too quickly to a challenging situation with a sense of fight, flight, freeze, although the situation doesn't actually call for it, it's known as having a narrow window of tolerance. So minor stresses may actually result in a quick mobilization down the ladder in that situation if a person has a narrow window of tolerance. And the body may not be able to efficiently return to the quote-unquote regulated state, or the state in which it's easy for you to self-regulate, really is what they're referring to, unless you get some help with that. And that's the good news. There's help out there now, and it's more explicit now that we understand this. So there's a saying that neurons that fire together wire together. So the more you do something, the more your brain responds to that activity. So to open the window, it happens naturally without effort when you learn practices that soothe hyperarousal. When you practice daily, your range, your emotional range and your chemical range of the hormones that you're used to shifts and adapts to a new norm, because we actually become addicted to the stress hormones. So there is like this very tricky detox period when you're learning to relax. It doesn't feel normal. And when you learn to tune into your body rather than tune it out, which is, of course, the prevalent cultural programming, you then begin to regain a sense of agency over your life. Agency is the feeling that I can do this. I can change. I can adapt. I can create the things that I want. So it's not really control. It's just that you no longer flip out at the least provocation either. So you regain a sense of control over your life because you're not living at the effect of it. And it's really, really empowering. So this growing ability to self-regulate is another really good definition of resilience. Another piece with regard to opening the window is that it happens naturally without effort when you learn practices that soothe hyperarousal. So when you practice daily, your range shifts and your nervous system over time adapts to this new range. And once you pass those tricky initial stages, it actually gets easier and easier because it builds its own momentum. Because neurons that fire together wire together. So you're rewiring your brain, and the new options become just as available as the old ones. So I do need to just insert the caveat that the old ones don't go away. So you still have to stay on top of your game in terms of being conscious and aware and practicing this on a regular basis so that you can choose the new ones, or so that your body really gets entrained with the positive hormones and the enjoyable endorphins and the neurotransmitters of well-being, the serotonin and oxytocin and all of those, the endorphins, all that good stuff that makes us feel open and happy and well. So in sum, I just want to say that the trauma release method is the method that I am using, which is a combination of many different disciplines, and it helps you use the neuroplasticity of your brain to your advantage. We've known about it for 10, 20 years, but it was kind of like one of those aha moments, now what? And this is now what? Now what is, this is the era. Now we understand that because this neuroplasticity, this flexibility of your brain to adapt, to change, to rewire itself no matter what your age, this means that you can use that principle to your advantage if you know how. If you know how to do things that are deeply regulating for the lower brain. The trauma release method refines your ability to respond to the sensory information your body is picking up from those around you. It develops interoception, which is a sense that people don't really talk about. It's a sense that helps you understand what you're feeling. And you do that by doing body scans where you really relax into and breathe into noticing parts of your body that you may have tuned out. For example, it's common, not even in people who have maybe never experienced trauma, but the elderly tend to be more sedentary. They tend not to use the 26 bones of their feet. They tend to sort of end up wearing shoes all the time, using their feet as blocks. So you can dramatically improve and increase the flexibility and the adaptability and the participation of all 26 of the bones in the feet simply by doing movement with awareness in that part of your body while you're in a relaxed state of focused attention. That just reconnects the fact that you have all these proprioceptive nerve endings. You're wired. It's all wired. It's there. It's just you haven't been using it. And it's a relaxing process. It's a relaxing way to reconnect. So it's pretty wonderful. So it expands your window of tolerance as you learn to toggle between a state of heightened sort of reactivity and a state of heightened serenity, calm, and presence, mindfulness. It integrates and organizes a greater access to self-regulation. And the more you expose yourself to deliberate awareness and soothing processes, the more relaxed you become in any situation. And you begin to find your voice because as you become more connected, you start to learn how to put things into language that previously overwhelmed you. And once you start to learn to verbalize what you're feeling, reflective writing is, in fact, a feedback loop in its own right. And it's like when you dip your hand into water, the sensory feedback from your fingers tells you what temperature it is. When you write, after entering into that state change of serenity and connection, you begin to find words for things you may not have been able to articulate for years. And self-expression is one of the most pronounced needs of loss. That's a whole nother conversation that we need to have. But when you gain clarity, you regain your voice, and it helps you access your inner wisdom, which is based on your connection with the field, the unified field, the part of you that is spirit having a human experience. When you tune into your body, you become more embodied. And I rarely say that because people are like, huh? What does that mean? You feel safer. You feel more comfortable. You feel more open to life. Why? Because it's literal. Someone who's connected to their body is safer, more ready for anything, more able to respond to whatever happens. I am a horse person. I've been working with horses professionally since 25 years. Lots of people's horses, not just my own. And there's a saying, at least I believe this, a horse that is connected to his body is a safe horse. And a horse that is aware of his surroundings but not aware of his body is going to run right over you. That's a dangerous horse. So I am all about helping horses and humans settle into a sense of presence in their own body and connection to their own environment, and realizing that your primary environment is actually your internal environment, not your external environment. And what happens then is, as you become more comfortable and more grounded and feel more safe in your environment, in your external environment, your relationships improve and you get greater access to inspiration. I get downloads every single day, more than I can even act on. It's really awesome. And as soon as I meditate, I start writing. I write them down. Nowadays, I don't journal at length. I write download 1, download 2, download 3. I do kind of like a sentence or two about each one because it's inspiring. I can't wait to go out and, do this stuff. Because inspired action is really different than doing stuff because you feel like you have to. It's a completely different way to live. And it unlocks curiosity and innovation that awakens new possibilities for a richer and a more enjoyable life. I just want to throw out thank you to all the people who helped me put this together. The Northwest Feldenkrais Guild did a workshop on polyvagal theory, and that recently, and that's kind of what jump-started my renewed interest in this. And there's so much information out there now. It's so much clearer. I really encourage you to don't take my word for it. Go do a little research on your own, nose around, get nosy, and try a couple of things, and just see if it doesn't actually all ring true at a very, very deep level. Thanks for your attention. I hope to see you on a live call soon.